passage to the billionaire class. You can't have it all.
Welcome, everybody, to the evolution of now. I am Christopher Robinson. I will be your main host for the day. I'm joined by my two esteemed colleagues and co-hosts and friends, Jordan Speed.
I wouldn't go that far.
Yeah,
all right, fuck you, Michael.
Sure all
right, fuck you, Jordan. But I guess these
claims is the best.
You tried to slip that one in, but we caught it.
You see this, guys? You see this, audience? This is what I have to deal with on a daily basis. I give them a compliment and say they're my friends. And I truly meant that from my heart. And these motherfuckers, they just, they just stomp right on it.
Are you done, Chris?
So, I'm joined by these assholes over here, Jordan Speed and by Michael Beswick. So, I guess, how's your week going, guys?
Same old, really.
Sad. Well, I know what one group of people's weekend has been last weekend, really. There was a government shutdown here, if you knew, Michael.
I was meaning to ask you about that. So did you just not have a government for a couple of days?
Yeah, it was great.
It was about a weekend.
We don't get these, so is that
Well, the problem I see in it is nobody really knows it happened because this is the existential weakness of the Democrats right now is they are just so weak-kneed that they can't do anything right. So they were trying to look big and tough and powerful in the face of these Republicans by shutting down the government on last Friday, when we had our last show. And then they caved in and gave the Republicans literally everything on Monday. So the government shutdown that happened literally had no effect at all. They basically took the exact same deal that was given to them on Friday on Monday. And it literally had no effect at all. So this is the situation with our politics here in America. So, thanks, Democrats, and yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the only plus side that I've heard is that they finally got funding for CHIP, which is it was months.
Well, the thing was with that though. They basically already had that before the government shutdown. That the government shutdown literally had no effect in that regard either. They were going to get that anyway. Because even the Republicans, most of the Republicans are in favor of children and children's health insurance. I mean, You'd have to be a psychopath to be yeah, fuck the children. I mean, it's the easiest layup anyone can ever give a politician. And
the best is they're oh, look how beneficent we are giving healthcare to all these children. You took it away.
Exactly. They were threatening to take it away, and the Democrats caved in, and
I mean, apparently,
classic Democrat fashion.
Definitely. I mean, apparently there was there's some division in the Democratic Party in terms of whether or not they should have kept the government shutdown. Yeah. But ultimately, it came down to the Senate Minority Leader Schumer, and he put the kibosh on the whole, staying strong and making, with their demands. He pretty much put the kibosh on it. So
strong and stable.
Right.
So I've got to say, my favorite thing, it might sound petty, but my favorite thing about the shutdown was the photos Trump released. Did you see them?
I did not. Oh my God.
No, you didn't?
I heard they were hilarious, though.
Yeah, Trump released a bunch of photos of him working hard, which is, he had nothing on his desk, and he just sat there with his phone, staring into space. You're
that's actually literally amazing.
Where he's got 20 odd people in the Oval Office, and he's standing there. They're all smiling, and he's like, "What are you doing?" it's like they don't know what working looks like.
You see that? I'm working so hard, you don't even know. It's tremendous how hard I'm working. You don't even know.
I think they
big league hard.
We just came in with some cameras and took some photos, but it's so obviously staged that they actually have to take time out of the day when they would be working.
Michael, I don't know if you know this, but I'm sitting at a desk. Obviously, I'm working hard. Would you not agree with that?
Right.
I'm sitting at a desk, therefore working hard.
He has his baseball cap inside the fucking Oval Office. Who are you?
It's so funny.
I am tremendous. That's who I am.
It's like
Big league.
someone who's never worked in an office before, what they think working in an office looks like. Yeah, I'm just going to sit here with my phone, and that's me working. Mm-hmm. Working.
Well,
just a room full of smiling people, and this is a meeting. Apparently, no one's taking notes, no one's writing anything down. There's no one doing anything. It's just a bunch of people
smiling.
Yeah. Massive grin.
I mean,
faces.
This might actually be the thing, though. Like, people at the higher echelons of companies might literally be doing that. Like, even like if you go back and watch even a few episodes of Mad Men, like that I watched the first episode of that show and then was like, yeah, I don't like this show. But even from that first episode, like what this guy does in his office, he goes to sleep in his office for like hours and then wakes up, does literally nothing. People come in and start talking to him about shit, and he sort of like bullshits his way through it. And that's it. Like he doesn't do anything. There's no paperwork he's doing all that much. He makes a phone call, and that's about it for the whole day. And like this might be literally the situation with the higher ups in a lot of these companies.
Well, I think it's worth noting that Trump's never actually managed a big business before. His business is dealing a lot of money, but in terms of the number of people Trump has to deal with, it's only generally his immediate family and a few staff.
Perhaps.
He's never dealt with an organization like the US government before, with thousands, millions even of employees.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's probably what he does think a meeting looks like.
Yeah.
When you're trying to manage a massive complex system like the government, you're just going to sit there on your phone with nothing on your desk, no notes or anything, just it's all up here.
Yeah.
There's nothing on his desk.
Yeah.
I don't need papers. I have it all in my mind.
The history of man. And he just sat there on his phone staring into space.
You see, I don't need papers because it's all on my phone.
Exactly.
So that's what it is.
That was the best bit of the government shutdown.
Yeah. But
I guess they had the time for it, eh?
I guess. But because let's get off of that though, I guess, at this point. Let's get into our topic this week. We have this chasm that everyone loves to tout, like, the right versus the left. But does anyone really know where that comes from, the left and the right and the left? Where does that dynamic come from, or what it means today?
No idea.
Well, that's our topic for this week. I wanted to start off by talking about the origins of it. And the origins are quite interesting to me, at the very least. I'm not sure about you guys. You guys don't really care about anything. You're just sad babies. But,
I'm indifferent to anything, Peter, to be honest.
But surprisingly enough, the left and the right signifiers actually comes from the French Revolution.
I believe so.
Yes.
I don't know if you wanted a thought there, but you paused. So.
Sorry, I had to pause for coughing purposes, but
I thought that pause was for reaction. You're waiting for us to go.
Well, that too, But now that everyone knows what happened, they will never unhear it. But in the 1780s, the French monarchy was having a little bit of a financial problem. You see, before the 1780s, France was mired into a bunch of different situations, especially tiny, small-scale wars and things. But notably, I guess, this little war in the Atlantic region called the American Revolution. That was happening. France actually helped America, and by doing so,
they had a massive impact, especially fighting the British Navy, which was huge at the time.
Yeah.
And I believe they even supposed to with some land troops, but I'm not sure about that bit.
I'm not sure how many. There might have been some, but I'm not at all sure how many. But yeah, it was mostly Navy, and being honest, without the French Navy, we would never have won the war. Almost positive on that. We would not have won the American Revolutionary War. Mm-hmm. So the French were very integral in our kicking out of the English monarchy, out of our politics. But that did come at great cost for the French government. And in the 1780s, it was coming to a head where their finances were so poorly managed, they almost had nothing left. And their coffers were running dry. And so the government, at the time, the French government had a taxation system in play. However, there was only really one group of people that were paying taxes. Now, to describe it a little bit more before I get into who that was, there were three tiers in the French society. There was tier 1 was clergy and people of the church. And the second tier were the nobles and the wealthy elites in the country. And the third tier was basically everyone else, the commoners. Now, I leave it to you guys to guess which one of these people, which one of these groups, held the lion's share of taxation. Do you know who?
Controlled taxation, you mean?
That'd be the who was paying the taxes at the time?
Oh, it's always the commoners.
Of course. I mean, it was a little obvious. But yeah, the clergy didn't pay taxes. The nobles didn't pay taxes because there was all kinds of tax incentives and everything in the system for them to basically pay nothing.
This sounds familiar somehow.
Yeah.
A system where the lower classes pay all the taxes and the upper class is always bitching and complaining about paying any level of tax.
Yeah.
What does that sound like?
Interesting.
I can't quite put my finger on it, guys. But yeah, that was the situation back then. The common folk were those that paid the brunt of the taxes. And these common folks didn't have much money to begin with, so they were already hurting. Now, another thing that actually happened during the 1780s that really put this into hyper context was there was a grain shortage happening at the time. And because of this, prices of bread skyrocketed for all of the common folk. The common folk that were already hurting because they were paying the brunt of all the taxes in the country. And now that they have to pay more to just buy food. And so while this was happening, the coffers run dry and France cut back in some ways, and the poor were sick of it. They were tired of this shit. And one thing that actually was happening right before the revolution itself happened was the king, knowing that there was a serious problem here, and there was a serious shortage in taxation and revenue for the government and the kingdom. They held an assembly of the three estates is what they were called. like I already mentioned before, the three estates were the clergy, the nobles, and the commoners. And so there actually were a lot more commoners than there were either of the other two. Collectively, it was about like the clergy and the nobles were just about equal in size to the commoners if you combined them. But the problem that was happening with the first assembly was that the nobles and the clergy were like, yeah, our votes count more than the commoners, the third estate. Your votes don't count as much as ours do. And so what happened then was the commoners of the third state were like, yeah, fuck you. And they left and they went to start their own assembly. Originally, the king actually locked them out of the room and said, okay, well, you're gone then. and that pissed them off even further. The third estate, yes. And they then found a room, which I believe was an inside tennis court. They found this room, and that's where the third estate actually assembled then to start to draw up their own constitution. And because this was happening, the second and the first estates then were like, okay, we should probably get in on this because we don't want to be screwed out if this thing actually happens. So they sort of like go into the third estate's little assembly eventually, and then they start working together. After this point, they're actually trying to create a new constitution for the French government. And this is where our topic today matters. During that time, when they were creating the Constitution of France, during the 1790s era, right around, especially when the revolution itself kicked into full gear, there were two major camps. The one camp was radicalized, and they wanted a republic. And this is not a system of governance with a monarch. And there were the people that were more conservative, and they wanted to keep the monarchy. They wanted to have what was called a constitutional monarchy, which I believe is exactly what England has today.
Yeah, and I was going to say that's the UK nowadays.
Yeah, I think even France might still have that. I'm not sure, but
don't think so.
After the revolution and all of it,
it's a bit different to the UK because nowadays the monarch has basically no power, but it's similar.
All right. So a lot of countries, though, in Europe still have constitutional monarchies, though. So that was the idea of the people in the conservative side of things. They wanted to conserve the monarchy and all of that. The divide happened, though, when the radicals that wanted to change the government to a republic sat on the left side of the assembly in regards to the assembly officer who was presiding over the entire thing. And so the radicals sat on the left side, and the more conservative members sat on the right. And this is literally where we get the terms left and right. This is why everything we see today is always about left and right. Because if you think about it, left and right is so arbitrary. It doesn't make any sense unless you have context behind what the hell that even means. Because
it's just what we call them now.
Yeah, exactly. Most people just think the left is progressive, right? And the right is conservative. And this is literally where it comes from. A lot of history comes from precedent. And this is how things work in a lot of historic contexts. Like, we've even talked on our show here about the Nazis, where when they were trying to find ways to implement the nasty policies that they wanted to, they needed to find precedent before they can actually implement them. And they found that precedent largely in America, in the United States specifically. Mm-hmm. So knowing that about history and how precedent really matters to people This is why we call the left more progressive and the right more conservative, because that is literally what it meant back in the French Revolutionary time. Mm-hmm. So that brings us today to what we call these things today in modern times. I actually I showed Michael and Jordan a video that I found on YouTube earlier this week. It was a 4-minute long explaining video of what this one guy's notion of the left versus right is. He goes into the same context of the French Revolution and everything, but he had a questionable way to explain what the left and the right were, in my opinion, at the very least. Mm-hmm. His idea of the left and the right was sort of left-wing means more government intervention, and right-wing means less. And that does not compute with me. That is literally not what the split means for me, right?
For anyone, I don't think.
Except for this guy, apparently. And maybe people that have a similar leaning to him, like...
Yeah, I suspect it's come from the libertarian one, but I think we'll talk about that.
Yeah. So that was his explanation, but I would like to get into our explanations of what the left and the right mean to us, at least. Because I don't know if you guys want to start out, but I can say mine right away if you guys want to hear.
I can go if you want.
You can go, Michael.
Yeah. Sure.
This is a democracy here, guys.
From how I understand it, I think we've obviously talked about our different explanations before we started the show. Mm-hmm. I think we all agree. The best way I've found of phrasing it, though, is that left-wing economics is about contributing what you make towards the wider society, mm-hmm. and right-wing economics is about keeping what you make for yourself. Neither of them can work on a pure level. Mm-hmm. So you find everyone somewhere in the middle of those two extremes.
Right.
All right.
There's also the other spectrum, which is how much you want government to be involved in society. Mm-hmm. So on the far libertarian end, no government at all. On the very authoritarian end, government controls everything.
Communism.
Yeah, and fascism, yeah.
Yeah. But you know what? That would have been... communism would have been a better term for him to use for the opposite end of libertarianism. But,
yeah, it is.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, authoritarianism works pretty well in itself, because, like, going back into that real quick, he sort of said that the left and the right were different from libertarianism versus authoritarianism. But in his saying, he was basically saying that left-wingers tend to weigh in more heavily on the authoritarian side, whereas right-wingers tend to go towards the libertarian side, which is complete and utter nonsense to me.
Not generally true. You find the bottom left corner of the traditional 2D compass is people who are very liberal, very little government, and left. And that goes diagonally up to very authoritarian and right-wing. And you find that most people are on that diagonal somewhere. Mm-hmm. The libertarians are down bottom right, so they very little government and right-wing economics. Mm-hmm. But most people are on that diagonal.
All right.
Communism's top left, but very, very few people are up there.
Yeah. And I think that just, I think it was, So instead of saying that, and I know he mentioned this point a little bit later, but there are so much nuance. There's so much nuance between when it comes to beliefs. So it's hard to gauge exactly where conservatives as a whole sits on that graph in terms of authoritarianism and libertarianism, because there is that division within the Republican Party, and more so than it is in the Democratic Party. Now, in the Democratic Party, I don't necessarily, I maybe because I'm in a bubble, but I don't sense that there's too much, strife in terms of, on the spectrum of authoritarianism and libertarianism, where do we kind of stand? I always thought that there was a consensus that you're somewhere in the middle, where like you're business friendly, except at the same time you don't necessarily promote business owning the means of to everything. There's always that. There's like you're sitting comfortably right in the middle, and that's what I always thought in terms of it may not necessarily be progressivism, but it is what I think when I think about the Democratic Party itself.
Yeah, that makes sense. You can even you'd be even surprised to think that a lot of people on the right and even on the left try and paint Bernie Sanders as some kind of radicalized communist or something like that, whereas actually on that authoritarian versus libertarian scale, he is, I would say he is more centrist than most people.
He's centre-left on the liberal end. Corbyn's more liberal, ish. About the same liberal, but further left.
Well, I'm saying on the authoritarian versus libertarianism, I think I would say he is very much in the center, whereas the left versus the right, which is liberal versus conservative, he is more towards the left. Mm-hmm. If that makes sense.
Yeah, he's sort of straddling between left and centre left, whereas someone like Corbyn's more firmly left. And then the far left are people like the Greens over in Europe who are crazy.
So
and the actual communist and socialist parties and stuff.
Yeah. Now, the way that I like to describe the left and the right is a little bit different than what you said, Michael. What would you say again? Just to reiterate what you were saying earlier
about how much of your labour you contribute towards society and how much you keep for yourself. How much you spend improving yourself.
All right. That's one way to look at it. The way that I look at it is I sort of frame it from the French Revolution in itself in a lot of ways, where the left wing back then were the radicals. They were the ones that wanted change. They were the ones that wanted things to move. Whereas the other side, the right wing, which were the more conservatives, wanted things to sort of stay the same, if not regress back to a beloved time, if it were, And that's the spectrum that I look at. Left wing is more, prone to change. They want change on the left, and the right wing wants things to stay the same. And that's the way that I look at the left-right spectrum. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you guys agree with that. Maybe?
It makes sense.
Yeah.
For example, most people on the right, as far as I know, at least across Europe and America, the older you are, the more right wing you are, and that makes sense. If you're older, you want to go back to your childhood, and you're going to be more conservative. You want to regress back to that.
Trying to live those high school years back when you're 65.
When they were 20 and they thought it was great, and because they've forgotten all the shitty stuff, dying of polio.
Yeah.
Right. And at least in America, when it comes to the boomers, when they were growing up, the economy actually worked for them. So, in terms of
black.
What'd you say?
As long as you weren't black or a woman or disabled or gay
yes,
or anything but straight or...
As long as you were a white male, let's say.
Cisgendered white male.
Yeah.
Right.
That was unfortunately the case back in those times, an especially big part of that was also the strength of labor unions. We cannot at all undercut the strength that the labor unions had and what that actually meant towards it. Because without the labor unions, even the white males would also be getting screwed over, even in those times, I would say. That was a very major player in the entire thing. And shockingly today, labor unions are on the massive recession. We have far fewer labor union jobs than we have had in decades now. You know, I think, I might be wrong on these numbers, but I think it was like 40-something% of the working class, maybe even more than that, back in the 60s and the 70s were part of a labor union. Whereas these days, I believe it's under 10% of the workforce.
Yeah, it is.
Is unionized. And that makes a huge difference. And we can even see it, you know, and when people on the right try and use certain Nordic countries as their, you see that they don't have a minimum wage and they're working fine. The thing is, they have extremely strong labor unions in those countries. And that's why they are able to get away with not having a minimum wage. They have a strong labor union that actually is fighting for the people. And you don't have that here in America. This is why repealing a minimum wage and then repealing a labor union unionization is completely antithetical to each other entirely. You know, it just leads to...
In this country, workers can't fight for their own rights because they don't have any power, because unions just don't have the power. Yeah. Whereas, so the government has to do it by a minimum wage. If you're going to stop the government from doing it, you have to have something else in there.
Yeah.
And that's unions.
And this is the problem with people on the conservative end of things today, is they want neither of those. You know, they want to get rid of the labor unions, they want to get rid of the minimum wage, and have no ability for actual workers to negotiate in any kind of work contract. And that is just going to end in abysmal conditions that we're already seeing in the workforce in America. The degradation
so
of it.
Much. The golden times that a lot of these old people are remembering. I know in the UK, post-war years, we had a big left-wing boom after the war. Massive progressivism, got the NHS, social housing, a few other things. And the economy was great. And they want to go back to that through right-wing policies.
By not having any of those things anymore.
Yeah.
Right.
It's exactly. Like, no. No. It's like, it's even here in America. The reason why a lot of the labor unions were strong, and we had the Housing and Urban Development Coalition happen, and all these different things happened after or during World War II even, but that was because Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the president at the time, put in a lot of different, very progressive proposals to get people back to work, to get people, you know, to prevent them from losing their homes. Because at that time, a lot of people were getting kicked out on the streets because they couldn't afford to live in their house anymore because they didn't have jobs. And so what was happening back then was people were coalescing in what were called Hoovervilles. We've talked about them a little bit before. They are the early 1900s equivalent of today's tent cities, and so a lot of poor people that were kicked out of their homes were living in these tent cities, and the way that we changed that was not only just the war itself, because the war in itself was a very big factor in why we were actually able to get out of the Great Depression in itself. But there were also many different things that the FDR administration put into effect that were very progressive. And one of those things was a minimum wage. And one of those things was an income tax, which predominantly fell on the wealthier, which is called a progressive tax system, which is what we've talked about in the past. The wealthier who can actually pay more do pay more, and the poorer that can't pay as much pay less, and that is a fair system.
Right. And you know, even on the side, like, look, in terms of okay, so the preservation of a traditional model and a traditional ideology is unnatural. It's unhealthy, in my opinion, because our, a species is always evolving. It's always changing. It's always developing new technology and new ways to operate and interact.
Fake news.
And so it just doesn't, it's very, well, of course, conservatism is antiquated, but just the idea that you're not supposed to, adjust, your thinking and your way of interacting, is just doesn't, it just seems stupid. It's, I don't know. It just doesn't work. That can't work in a society, period. People are going to migrate and, people are going to, discover new ways to live and new things about themselves. And if the structure that you abide by every single day and that you're a part of doesn't allow you that freedom to explore and to actually, live life according to, what you have discovered about yourself, then it just doesn't work. Then that's a system that doesn't work for everyone. We need, and of course, there's whales. There should be whales in terms of, the powerful and the elite and how much they're able to influence, society. Because, taking into account the French Revolution and other important markers within history, they know, we can assess, at least we should assess our government and just as people that amount of power in the hands of in a marginal amount of elite people is not productive for our society. It's actually, reductive. It slows down our process in the development of technology and people that can actually contribute to society, by actually marginalizing them and slowing down their development. So, so I guess in a nutshell, what I'm just saying is that for the life of me, a part of me, I don't know where this, the conservative model is going to be in future's time, because, young people are growing up with a new normal. Like like in the US, gay marriage is legal in certain states. Marijuana is legal. They're seeing people of color and they're seeing women hold powerful positions, within society. And so it's like, wait a second, like that is what we know to be, that is our tradition, and so they're going to want to carry that tradition into the future. And then the kids after them is going to start noticing or their normal is going to be completely different, and they're going to want to take that into the future. So like something you say, Chris, all the time, which is like the future, or something about the future being progressive, or,
history has a very distinct progressive bias. Yeah,
exactly.
Something like that.
Exactly.
I think
yeah, it does.
It's a quote I think that I stole from Neil deGrasse Tyson. I think. I think
Nice.
that's where it comes from. But,
Well, the next generation score massively lower in most all kinds of prejudice. Tends to be much more progressive, much left leaning.
Yeah.
Much more accepting of science.
Yeah.
There's quite a lot of good things when they grow up.
I mean,
hopefully it holds.
I welcome a time when I'm considered conservative.
Yeah.
When the beliefs that I have are the established beliefs, like, equal pay for equal work for women. When that's a conservative value, I look forward to that. When LGBTQ rights are a conservative value, I look forward to that time. And I will become a conservative at that time, When labor unions are a conservative value, I will be conservative. when all of these social changes that we are fighting for today become conservative values, I welcome that time. I want to be conservative at that point. It depends on what the new change is going to be at that point. Whether we're going to start trying to change back in a degree is if, like, I might be considered a conservative at that point. Let's say we win all these fights, and when we're 80-year-old men, the country is now, like, women have equal pay for equal work. And now the new generations are trying to say, well, no, I think women should be in the home and men should dominate the workforce. And that's the progressive side of things. I am definitely not okay with that. If that's the way that people want to change the society, no. I'm going to be the conservative at that point. And this is why I say the spectrum of left versus right is a spectrum versus change and resistance to change. So right now, the resistance to change that the Republicans and the conservatives that I see are fighting against are all very important changes that need to happen. Equality for even, ethnic communities, blacks, Latinos, Asian, anything. These people should be equal members of society, and that is a change that needs to happen. Yeah. And I want that to be a conservative value one day, when we can all be actually equal. Now, the problem with that is it's not going to take one lifetime to change that, unfortunately. I don't see that really realistically in our lifetimes ever becoming the norm, but we can at least strive for that to be the norm at some point in the future. Hopefully in our lifetimes. I really do hope it does come. But knowing people in some ways, it's hard to believe that could happen in a lifetime or in a generation.
Right. A part of me feels like the label of conservative itself is insufficient, because if it is able to be so easily moved in with due time, then I feel like it doesn't, at least according to your definition, Chris, it's like it doesn't even necessarily represent an ideology. It's just, or it represent this, it doesn't necessarily a very distinct ideological, position. To me,
the thing that I can push back on is, do we really need to have like distinct terms to to bunch people into boxes at that point?
It's useful.
It is useful.
Yeah.
I get that. I definitely do get that. But what it ultimately does, it does actually create rifts between those boxes. And so people will never, ever come to each other at a point. And we're seeing that especially today in America, where the conservatives are being more and more and more brazen with their ideology. And
though that's largely, I don't think that's because they're in a box themselves as such. I think that's more, well, for various reasons. They just keep getting pushed further and further along, partly because of the money in the politics.
Well, it's a little bit about alienation, though. When you start putting people in boxes, you start alienating people, is the way that I'm looking at it. I hope that makes sense. And we know for a fact that even like authoritarianism versus libertarianism is a spectrum. Left versus right is a spectrum. And we all sit on there somewhere, and we just have to find out where we can intersect with each other and agree on things. And
I would propose that it's more to do with right-wing politics generally mean a person can keep more of the money they make. So if you're very rich, you keep more of that richness. So a lot of the rich people prefer right-wing politics. Cat, get off the fucking keyboard, stupid cat.
We heard the cat that time, actually. But I see that as like the problem I see with that, though, is I see that as like the spectrum between Democrat and Republican, not exactly the left spectrum versus the right spectrum.
But, Chris, where was I going with that? Yeah. if you conservative people they want to go back towards the previous age, like we've said.
Yeah.
So if you can tell them, hey, look, way back when there was less immigrants in the country and the economy was great. So all we need to do to get back to the great economy is get rid of all the immigrants. You can convince them to become more racist. And I can't remember the effect's called, but there's an effect. It's got a name where you widen the window, and then the normal opens up. You shift the normal along slowly, so the more and more extreme positions become more normal. And I think that's what's happening with US and UK politics, is that the right wings, they've expanded that window a little bit at a time and slowly inched further and further into extremes.
Yeah.
Where way back when it would have been a small movement, but now it's progressed so much that Nazis are almost mainstream. Trump's a white supremacist.
Right.
Now,
and that's considered mainstream politics.
The way that I look at it, though, is like, let's look at the Dreamers Act, DACA. DACA is established politics right now. I would say keeping DACA and that whole fight is sort of a conservative position in the spectrum, I guess. And on this issue, the right wing, the Republicans today are sort of on the left side of it, where they're trying to change things. With my more generalized definition, at least, of left versus right being left being change and right being not changing or regressing. They want to change immigration to something else than what we have right now, in some ways, right? Does that make sense? I hope I'm not If
you talk about left as in reformers, then yeah, that makes some sense.
Right.
Yeah.
But you could say they want to regress to a time when that wasn't the case. But
that's
whatever.
true too.
I think
this is the hardness of this whole thing. Go, Jordan. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. I was going to say, I think we're also neglecting how religion plays a part in all this, because I think the fundamental ideals of religion is a big factor, is a big influence on the Conservative Party in their positions on so many different issues. So I think that's a huge factor in terms of whether or not you support them or not, is where you sit on terms of I guess the religious spectrum. If you're more I guess traditional in your views of your religion, then you will be conservative. If you're a little bit more secular, then you're kind of in the middle. You may vote, make conservative at a certain point, but you may also vote more progressive or more liberal as well.
I would also say with that
the doctrines of religion were written a long time ago, and so their societal morals were also built a long time ago.
Right.
Yeah.
And so you're more tied to that past than progression, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I guess. The only other thing that I would say is right wingers, do tend to be more religious, because religion is very resistant to change. But on the same token, just like we said that guy's read of, leftists are more authoritarian and right-wingers are less authoritarian. And Michael, you were saying that it's actually the opposite of that, where leftists tend to be more libertarian and right-wingers tend to be more authoritarian.
Yeah,
I would say
is more for societal control, nationalism, things like singing the national anthem. They tend to be more for controlling people's personal lives, banning gay marriage and things like this, and controlling abortions and denying things like transgenderism and homosexuality and all this stuff. It's most of the right that does that kind of thing.
Yeah. Right. But what I was trying to say with it, though, is not only is it the left versus right spectrum that sits where you're saying, but it's also religion itself. When you're more religious, you are actually more authoritarian. And when you're less religious, you're more libertarian. Because just think about religions. Religions are all, most religions are all about the hierarchy system. You know, God is above all. And then under him, from the Catholic faith, Pope. Under the Pope, the bishops. Under the bishops, cardinals or whatever it is. I don't remember if the cardinals or the bishops are twisted there, but there's a hierarchy there. And the end user, the person of faith that's not in that religious hierarchy is at the low level of that. And so you submit yourself to the will of the rest of the authoritarian regime there. You know, you submit your ideology, your morality to what let's say the Pope says, or what God says to you, what you think God says to you. And so in that, because of that, you're going to be more authoritarian prone. And when you reject religion, you're more libertarian prone, I think.
Yeah, it's almost, they treat the laws of government as an extension of the laws from God. And you're right, it's this whole idea of subjugating the rest of society to the laws that God, and that quote unquote God has already set in stone. Yeah. I mean, Just look at the Middle East right now. We have all of these right wingers in our country, like demonizing all of like these Muslim countries. And the thing is, with a lot of the very religious countries in the Middle East that are very devoutly Islamic and run as a Islamic state, they tend to be more authoritarianism. They're not more libertarianism. They're definitely a lot more intrusive into the people's lives, and they use religion for that purpose. They use religion to have that authoritarian regime control what you think and what you do. Right. But then money comes in and starts influencing the decisions that the conservatives and even liberals make. And so that makes it creates a new spectrum on the grid that, in terms of,
it's a new god in some ways, you know? Yeah. Money becomes a new god in some ways.
It does. But we're in this weird place now where the conservative values of being very staunch and planting your feet in a certain, on a position is now kind of compromised to a certain degree by moneyed interests. So that is why they are like more libertarian when it comes to business, except when it comes to their personal ideology, they're more authoritarian. So it's like, it's a sliding, it's not a sliding scale. It's actually depending on, the only, area that they are libertarian on is business, and everything else is very authoritarian. So like, it creates that weird.
That's a very astute point there, Jordan.
Yeah. Right. Thank you.
It's as if we all live on spectrums, and it's not like
basically everything's a spectrum.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, the way you look at the spectrum is like you can place yourself on the spectrum generally, but then when you go point by point, with, like I was saying, like Roe v. Wade and abortion rights. You might sit on a different part of the spectrum than where your generalized point is. Maybe you're a little bit more conservative on it. And if you defined conservative the way that I do, at least, on that point, which I guess is really not the way that people use it, unfortunately, these days, they've kind of muddied up these terms and sort of made them right versus left. And like you guys said, it does make a difference to label these things, but I believe the left and the right terminology is not the correct way to label these things as much. I don't know. It's tough. Like I said, it's a really big spectrum, and it's really hard to label things in one way. But like, we all have different views on different issues, like I was saying. Some people may be more resistant to LGBTQ rights, but on the same token, be all in favor of expanding healthcare to universal healthcare. So you can have a very, what people call a liberal idea, which is universal healthcare, and you can also have a very conservative view, which is anti-LGBTQ rights. And so this is why it's so really hard for me to really be able to label anyone left or right or any of that, because the spectrum is so vast. Exactly. And this is why I sort of want to take left and right away from the conversation and sort of just say left and right is point by point liberal or more change oriented versus more resistant to change.
Right. Well, consider the average person, and they think about like the average Republican. They're not going to see any improvement. They're not going to see. They're not benefiting from the corporate tax going down to what, 21%? Is that it?
I think it's is it 25% or I don't even know.
Something, but it's lower than what it initially was set. And in all of this relief for big banks and for in all this I guess I don't know, all these benefits and these slashing of taxes that they're doing for these corporations. Your average Republican is not seeing any return from that. It's not improving their lives. It's not improving their lives. And so when I think about, so what aligns them to the conservative party, you start to think about, things like religion and their stance on, say, abortion, which is tied to religion, and also tolerance in terms of outsiders, people who are different, who maybe aren't from here, immigration. Like, I think racial and gender tolerance in your sexuality, tolerance on that, or your intolerance on that, and also how far you are in terms of your religious ideals determines how conservative you are. I truly believe those two things, are the main deciding factors in terms of whether or not you're a conservative.
All right.
Probably. I will say that a lot of people seem to be their prejudices come first, and then they go towards the party that supports those prejudices and just go with the economics of that party, whatever it happens to be.
Right.
Yeah.
Like the prejudices precede the economics.
Yeah. I mean,
especially in America.
A lot of the times people, I mean, there is the case of the one issue voter on both sides of it. Like there are some people that are just against, abortion. And so that in itself is all the reason that they need to always vote Republican. And so that does happen. And then I guess in some ways, because we label the two sides as two like just monolithic pieces that like either you're conservative through and through or you're liberal through and through, it sort of also comes with the baggage of those other things, and sometimes that can also lead to someone that really only joined the party to be against gay or abortion rights, and now all of a sudden they're dead set against gay rights, they're dead set against minimum wage, they're dead set against labor unions. I think that can happen, but I don't know where I was going with this point. Just being honest, but I mean, well, it all boils down to a spectrum, though. Like we really need to, in a lot of ways, be able to parse between things as people and find common ground. Like I said, I think at the beginning of this whole thing, we really need to be able to come together and find out what we agree with, and then parse out our differences from there, and find out what we can do to work towards the goals that we all collectively want.
The problem I see with that is a lot of in modern politics there is a big chunk of people whose only ideology is being against what the other party is doing.
Right.
Yeah. I will say mostly on the right, not exclusively, but mostly on the right, especially Republicans, the Republican Party at the moment, their only ideology is everything that Obama isn't.
Right.
Yeah.
So how do you find common ground with someone whose only ideology is doing exactly the opposite of what you do? It's impossible.
I can say I think that's the problem with having binary politics, where there's only two dominant leading parties, when it doesn't give you anything in between or anything even further in terms of Democrats, anything further to the left. And so, I think, like in certain European countries do, which is actually introduced, or give, parity to third parties and then in Congress, or, that's when they, have to start, shaking hands and compromising, on certain issues, because, now there's so many different, factors, at play, so many different, ideologies at play now. And then it frees up the, society to actually find a niche, find a party that actually suits them in a more, almost like, more accurately than two parties.
It's why I want proportional voting.
Yeah.
At the moment, your two parties, the Democrats and Republicans, are better thought of, I found, as a tent with lots of little parties inside who are loosely working together. Exactly. So in the Democrats, you've got the corporatists and the progressives who agree on social issues but do have wildly different economic views.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure there's going to be a lot of other different offshoots in between there too, between those.
I think it would benefit America if you could split those up and have a voting system to support that, so that you don't have to be a Democrat tacitly supporting someone who you don't necessarily agree with. You could be a progressive and be distinct from the corporatists.
Yeah. I think one of the systems...
Even if you're working with them on even if you agree, okay, you think gay marriage is great, we think gay marriage is great, let's work together on that. But then it comes to economics, no, I don't want to tax cuts, you stupid. No, we're not going to do that.
Yeah. One system that seemed to make a lot of sense to me, at least from the very basic idea that I have of it, is I think this is the German system. We might have to have an entire podcast just on the German system itself. I think what happens there is you vote for a party essentially, and then the vote tally from that is how many seats essentially are apportioned to that specific party. You know, like, so let's say nationwide, let's say the Democrat Party gets 30% of the vote. They'll get around 30% of the seats. And let's say the Green Party gets 10% of the vote. They'll get around 10% of the seats, and so on and so forth down the line. You know, that in itself, to me, seems like a good idea, because then you're voting for a party that you want instead of, like, I don't know. It gets really complicated.
I prefer the ranked choice system itself,
Yeah.
which is you rank the parties in
Yeah, I mean,
your ranking. So I most prefer this party, but they might be a fringe party.
All right.
My second choice might be this major party.
yeah.
So in the American system right now, I might vote for Greens as a first choice.
Right.
I know they're probably going to win, but they get my vote.
Yeah.
But then I'll vote for Democrats.
That's a good idea, too.
Because I have a second choice.
Yeah.
Then I might vote for some other party, a socialist party, for example.
It's almost as if we should have episodes specifically on this. I don't know.
Well, then the Republicans and stuff are right down at the bottom, because I really don't want those. Whereas right now, I mean, in the UK, for example, Labour's my first, then Liberal Democrats, then Greens, and I really don't want the Tories and UKIP. But if I vote for the Liberal Democrats in my area, it's one less vote that Labour gets. And the Liberal Democrats have no chance of winning. It's between Labour and UKIP. So I'm helping UKIP to win in that case.
Yeah.
Right.
Whereas in this system, I could vote for the party I want, but still not be helping the other party. So what happens is, if there's no majority, no party gets a majority in the first. So they count all the first choices. If no party gets a majority, the party who came last gets eliminated, and they count the second choices. And if there's no majority, the party comes last gets eliminated, and they count the third choices until someone gets a majority. Right.
That's actually, I do like that. And I definitely like that on a national scale. I think in terms of a state level and on a community scale, I like what Chris, I like what you proposed. Well, your idea, the German.
I think that's how the German system works. Don't quote me on that, because it might be wrong. We definitely should look more into it on a
yeah. We'll have to do an episode on it. Different voting systems.
Yeah, we'll definitely touch on it eventually, for sure.
For sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, like there probably is ways where we can find the best systems and how they're working, and then maybe take the best parts of these different systems and combine them. It's almost as if you can do that. You know,
wow. You mean we can take the stuff other countries do and just put it together and
the things that they're doing right and do those, and what they're doing wrong. Okay, don't do those.
Yeah, exactly. It's weird, this learning from other people, isn't it? Fucking hell.
It's almost as if
I feel like that's
human society is just based on that. Go, Jordan.
No, I feel like that's the only way we can, for a government to guarantee fairness in terms of the voting process. Having everyone represented, or at least have that ranked choice. So I think that's people will actually feel as though one thing that was so prevalent in the 2016 election in the U.S. was the fact that so many people voted for candidates who they had to hold their noses, when they submitted their ballot.
The lesser of two evils kind of thing,
Yes. People, at least the people that I interacted with, I've never interacted with someone that was so pro-Trump. And look, you're right. And a big part of that is because we live in New Jersey. It's a Democratic state. Yeah. And then, but also on the side of Hillary, there were some people here and there, but I felt like on a more, in terms of her symbolically, I interacted with people who were very strongly supportive of her candidacy. But in terms of ideology, which she exactly stood for necessarily, I didn't find anyone that was so strong with her agenda in her platform. So, like, yeah, this whole, like, man, what an odd conclusion we're in right now. We're completely, like, away from the two-party ideal that we initially set our conversation.
It's not technically, I don't feel like this is actually, again, like the two-party system that we're talking about. You know, the larger structure of what we were talking about is the left versus the right. And that in my opinion, is not a fight against Democrats and Republicans, which are two parties. What this is about is ideology in itself. And left versus the right, like I've said, the way I like to term it is the left is change and is radical change. And the right is unchanging. And because of that, we are all on the spectrum. We all have conservative values, and we all have progressive values. Even in your own self, if rights for LGBTQ peoples and women are part and parcel to everything that you stand for, that in your personal view is, you cannot change that, right? And in that way, it's almost conservative for you. You know, like we're really talking about like an ideological like landscape, and it's we want to label one side or the other, and I really don't like the concept of labeling one side the left and one side the right, because like I've said, it puts people in boxes, and it shuts down conversation before we even have it sometimes. Because they then predispose you to be, oh, well, you're a liberal, so you're all these things. Or, oh, you're just a conservative, you're all these things. And we're not getting to the heart of the issues. We're not talking about the issues because we're now just fighting against, my party is better than your party. You know, and my team is better than your team. And we need to get away from that fight, I think, to ever actually have reasonable change.
What's so interesting is I feel like the only panacea for that is having more boxes. Where it's like
damn it, Jordan.
More...
You're wrong.
It seems very counterproductive, but like having more boxes will eventually get.
But the problem is, like, if you keep making boxes, it keeps dividing people further. You know, like
practically speaking, you can never have a spectrum entirely in terms of politics. Eventually you need to work with people, and there are some people you will work with more often than others, and they are your party. But you can have more boxes, and that means it approximates more to a spectrum than having just a simple two binary where you're either this end or this end.
Yeah, I just don't like the binary of it. And like I think it just shuts down conversation before we have anything, you know, because, you know, if you try and talk some sense into a conservative that's marching for Trump or something like that, you know, they're going to ask you, what are you, a liberal? And if you say yes, then they already have shut you down in their own mind. They're not going to listen to you. They're not going to hear you out anymore. Because, oh, you're the other team. You're bad guys. So I'm not going to listen to you. I've been conditioned not to listen to you by Fox News and my Lord and Savior Donald Trump and Alex Jones and these assholes. And it just muddies the water in a lot of ways, I think. I don't know. Like
it's too polarized.
Tough.
It's too polarizing.
Tough. Yeah.
It's when you only have two options, it creates polarization.
Exactly. Yes.
And that's so unnatural. Like life is not polarizing. We have to start becoming more philosophical when we talk, as a society, because I feel like then we'll start to take into account the different nuances of life and realize we can't operate. We can not only operate that on a day-to-day basis on our own personal lives. We can't operate that as a society at large. You can't have polarization. You have to have, we're just one massive gray area, and we need to have a system that represents that. And so that's just not how it is. So.
This is the tough thing about all of this. None of this is happening in a vacuum. None of this happens in a vacuum. We can't actually disconnect all of our strifes, our issues, our struggles from each other. We cannot do it because everything is interconnected in this world. Everything in society is interconnected. All of the fights that we find ourselves dealing with. This is why it makes it so complex. This is why it's so hard to change things. And this is why people like to try and polarize the things, because it's easier. It's easier to just say, well, I'm a leftist, or, oh, I'm a right-winger, or, oh, I'm a conservative, or I'm a liberal, because it makes it so much easier to understand what you believe in and what you stand for. And I 100% understand that. But we need to also understand that these problems all are happening together. LGBTQ rights are happening at the same time as women's rights, at the same time as African American rights, at the same time as Latino rights, at the same time as the fight for minimum wage for workers. At the same time, we're trying to fight for labor unions, or some people fighting against them. And at the same time, we're dealing with capitalism run amok. At the same time, we're also dealing with global warming and climate change that is literally destroying our environment in radical ways that we don't seem to have any ability to change to really meet at this point. And so all of this coming together, it's so difficult to really be able to parse everything out at once and fight all of it. Right. But the unfortunate truth of it all is we need to. Whether we like it or not, we need to. We have to have this multifaceted, dimensional struggle on a million different issues, and it sucks so bad to have to do all of this at once. But this is the world we live in, because if we keep trying to box things together, it's leading to more resentment and more hatred and more anger between the two sides. And we will never bridge the gap if we keep going this way. It's Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. had said essentially, about the struggle for civil rights. This is not just, a liberation of the black man, but also the white man from the hatred and the bigotry that is in his heart, that has hardened his heart. We all are in this thing together, and we all need to work together. If we don't work together, we die separately in some ways, I hope that all makes sense.
Totally. Look, binary forces are only useful in fictional stories and fairy tales. When there's a rebellion and then there's the empire.
But there's that evil wizard, though. We have to defeat him. And then once we defeat the evil wizard, everything is good.
Right. Right.
Right? Isn't that how it works?
Exactly.
Nice.
But go on with your point, Jordan. I'm sorry.
That's okay. That's okay. I mean, I was just making a statement, just saying that's the only time that's ever useful, because it gives you it offers a very neat conclusion. Except that's just not how society works, and it provides and it does create the idea of a good and an evil. You know, the Republicans look at the Democrats as evil. Democrats look at Republicans as evil.
Yeah.
Like that's the force that we have to fight against.
And also righteousness versus deplorableness and stuff, you know.
Right,
and
right.
It's the same thing, but just on the other side of it. You know, we're the righteous ones, they're the bad guys. Or, oh, we're the righteous ones, they're the bad guys kind of thing, yeah.
Right, right.
Yeah. So, again, I do find it hard to combat that when it's one of them where I think, right, we should maybe try to work together more. But then the other guy's telling you about how Mexicans are rapists. Like, how do you work with that?
Right.
There is a certain point where you can't work with the other side because they're just too far gone.
Right.
Let's find a compromise between black people being human and not human, eh?
Right. Exactly. But then again, I feel like there should be a party for that. Like, because there's plenty of conservatives or Republicans who don't think like that. Well, except they're forced to side with a party who does, or side with a party that has a individuals that do. And so, you know, that makes them look bad. And so, you know what I mean? So
the way I look at that in itself, though, is, you know, some people don't look at black people as humans, you know, and that's sort of like a framework more than it is like a brick to everything. So, like, there's other things that you can whittle down before you even get to that, you know, and it's tough. It's going to be a long, arduous task, and you have to whittle down that framework because there's, I'm sure, many different things going on there as to why they think that blacks are not humans, let's say, as the one. But you have to be able to, there are ways to whittle down those structures, because I've mentioned it many, many times, and it's resonated with me personally. I found this one story that I heard on NPR a few years ago exceptionally important. This black man who lived in the South, he was a jazz player. I don't want to go super far into the thing because we're way over time, I think, at this point. But the basic gist is this guy wanted to get to the heart of why white supremacists and especially KKK members hated black people. And so what he did was he met with the head of the KKK at the time, and over the years of them knowing each other, that KKK member who was the leader of the KKK at the time, he eventually left the KKK, and they became very good friends, him and this black jazz player. So there absolutely are ways that we can foundationally change this framework of racism. We just have to know how to approach it, I think is what we have to do. And we don't know how to do that personally. You know, like, you don't know how to do that, Michael. I don't know how to do that, Mike, either, you know, and we have to figure those things out, you know. Hopefully that makes sense, because it is very impossible to assail some kind of like structural framework of an ideology. You know, you cannot hit it head on and win. You have to dismantle it from the bottom up. You know, you have to get to the foundations first as to what triggers them to think these things, and all of the little bricks. That's how you dismantle it.
Yeah.
Still,
it's tough. It's extremely difficult. It's always going to be difficult.
It is, but I think the goal is more interaction. The goal is they have more people having to compromise and having to listen to where each other stands on a certain subject, and I think, like, you know, your party, it's.
I'm sorry, Jordan. What was that? I wasn't listening. No, I'm just.
God.
All right.
No, but I mean, I don't want to sound like a broken record, but it's just honestly, like, the party thing is so important. Like, it's because I feel like that's it will stop something. It will stop a groupthink in a sense. You know, it will stop people from going. You know, I'm just going to I'm going to overlook that aspect and just and still vote for this and still vote for these people.
Yeah. You
know, you grow a toleration for things that you don't necessarily agree with, and instead of actually, having a dialogue about fixing them, you just kind of go through the motions because that's just what the party at large thinks on a certain thing, and so it's unproductive. It's very unproductive, and the same goes for on the more democratic side of things. You need that. You just need that constructive conversation, and it can only come from people actually having confidence and feeling represented and fully, with their beliefs, and then they're able to kind of tackle these things more constructively. But that's me. That's it.
All right. Well, I guess I accept it. Since we're pretty much out of time, like we were probably like way over time.
We were out of time about half an hour ago, yeah.
Probably. Mike, any last words before I go into the credit portion of the...
I had an idea, but I've forgotten it.
Well, you've lost your time. Thank you, everybody, for joining.
It's worth knowing that your positions will never be 100%. You will have to compromise a bit, but it's worth knowing what you will not compromise on. Civil rights, things like this. And also, try to decouple your ideology from your party so that what you vote for isn't necessarily what you believe. If you vote for the Democrats, you don't have to believe everything they do. And same with the Republicans. You might prefer them over the other party, but it doesn't necessarily mean you have to fall in line with them. You can make your own decisions on a policy by point basis.
Yeah. I like it. And with that, guys, thank you so much. I don't know, maybe I should just like skip the outro little, follow us on Facebook and stuff, the links will be in the description, guys. So, if you're interested, all that's going to be in there. But, my last, words is just sort of mirroring what Michael said there. Yeah. Like, we are on a ideological spectrum, guys. Do not think that you have to, fit into a box. If that's what makes it easier for you to understand, where you are, because largely, a lot of people do fit into these boxes if we want to label them that. But my personal opinion is they only get in the way when we actually are trying to change things and trying to have a conversation with people that we don't necessarily agree with on issues. So, with that, just try and be more mindful, hopefully. If we can instill anything in you guys, just be more mindful of other opinions and try not to jump to labels immediately. But with that, also, I will close the show by saying, fuck you, Donald Trump.
Yeah, and Jordan doesn't get a last word because he's Jordan.
Yeah, screw you, Jordan.
Yeah, I have nothing to say to that.
Sad. baby sad. That's what that is.